Alright, so we're going to look at Sinatra Says' video on definitions changing so that literally everything is racist. Right? He's going to make a really bad argument. So we'll get into here and we'll talk about it, and I'll explain some other threads that come up.
Yes. What is more current year, and by current year I mean anything from 2016 on, than changing the definition of something to meet your own political needs? The most,
So I love this 2016 and on. It shows just how fucking clueless he is with the definitions. Oh yeah, I love the later elements too, but on this the definition and stuff. Oh, pre 2016, nobody changed this definition. This meant something else before. It just this is how clueless he is on things, right? So this comes to things like what I call, or the term I picked up through is like as a parallel would be like the atheist community, where if you meet online atheists, generally speaking, they're always going to use the lack of belief definition, right? In this term, even though that is a more modern definition and something that was pushed pretty heavily in the last 50 years by the atheist community itself, in large part to pump up its numbers. And so when you get someone like me who's an atheist that says, I believe no gods exist, which is the traditional sense of the word, and beyond just the traditional sense of the word, it's the one used pretty heavily in philosophy, in strict sense. He's gonna take, like pre 2016, like he's gonna talk about like phobia and stuff here when it comes up, and phobia has been used this way far longer than 2016, but he's a dumbass. Oh yeah, that debate with Jangles was really bad. Mm-hmm.
the most apparent example of this would be the phobia thing. It's phobic to not like something, apparently, when the definition of phobia is an irrational fear of. And when people started saying, well, nobody has an irrational fear of trans, an irrational fear of gays, blah, 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 they started going, well, we're going to change the definition. So the actual dictionary definition for phobia changed from irrational fear of to irrational fear of and aversion to. So today,
And so these definitions are well before pre 2016. I mean, they go back 100 plus years. The irrational fear of would be like the psychological use of. So when you talk about psychological conditions, phobia and claustrophobia and stuff like that, that's the irrational fear of, where that comes from. And the aversion to definition comes from use in yeah, oh yeah, there's plenty of irrational fear with the trans stuff and the but this guy's, well, it's not irrational, right? So like if you've seen, back to the atheism thing, if you think like atheism is unstoppable, talking about Islamophobia, right, will be blatantly Islamophobic, and you say, it's not irrational to fear Islam and all this other stuff. It's perfectly rational. So even when they have the fears, they'll try to say, well, it's not irrational, it's in there. But the aversion to use of phobia comes is used quite frequently in science and other terms. So like if you describe molecules that are hydrophobic, for example, right? So they have an aversion to water molecules and stuff, right? So that'd be one sense here. But these terms have also gone with other things too that aren't strict irrational fear, because that's strictly the psychological definition, right? For those terms, right? So you have things like a germanophobe, or as a comparable to like a germanophile, right? If we take something stuff there, right? And so these are used well across here, and phobia has been used plenty of different ways in this thing. And just because a root word means something specific, right? And so this comes to the atheist issue I brought up earlier, is they'll look and see, well, a means without, and that's not all a means, but that's what they'll use to define atheist. A means without, and theist means belief in God. So therefore, an atheist is without a belief in God. But that's not how that term has been used historically, right? So it derives from atheos coming through, I think, French in the 15th or 16th century, atheisme. Um, but atheos was used heavily for Christians, right? And we know Christians aren't atheists, right? In any sense of the word. And so it didn't mean that, you just lack a belief or you're without a belief in a God. It meant that you denied, Christians being monotheists, they denied the polytheist gods. So they were the group that was most often labeled atheists. Or atheos, excuse me. Oh yeah, no, it's definitely irrational, but that's part of the argument they would make it up there. So even if they said they do have fear, right, they'd argue that against it wasn't irrational, and therefore it's not a phobia, so they're not a transphobe, right? It's this really weird pedantry they want to engage in. That's not even really good pedantry. It just shows a lack of understanding of things like etymology and just how words work in general, or language works in general.
Today we're going to take a look at an article about racism. Yay! And how if there is no racism, there's still racism, because they just changed the definition of it. Hey guys, as I'm sure you all know,
So we're not going to listen to the shill spiel that he puts in there. Box. Yeah. 135, I think is a good one.
From here on out, we'll go on the second channel. Thank you. The way you define racism may stop you from seeing it. So what definition do you hold? Are you discriminating or being prejudiced against someone for their skin color? No? Well, then you're not racist. But let's get to why that definition is probably wrong. Some things...
So, and a lot of this here, like words are polysemous, can mean a whole bunch of things, right? And sometimes different things, right? So the big one that people like to be exasperated about is the changing definition of literally, right? So literally means you can also mean figuratively right now in dictionaries now. And it's like, oh, this is a betrayal of language and all these different meanings and stuff here. It's like, no, dictionaries describe how language is used, right? And literally meaning figuratively actually goes back hundreds of years as well, right? It kind of goes in and out of style. But it's used pretty much the same way we do, oh, literally this, literally that. When it's like, no, it wasn't literally that. But it's used like in books and stuff like there to... for artistic license and stuff like that.
Things are glaringly racist. Being called racial slurs, being attacked for looking and sounding different, being mistreated for your skin color. Most of us can probably agree that these things are racist. Yeah, we can. These fit into the establishment understanding of racism, the belief that one's own racial or ethnic group is superior, as defined by the Oxford Dictionary. But
so, established, not establishment, because what you would argue is the establishment would be academia, and academia uses different times definitions of racism, right? To mean not just this, right? And so, one ways we would use it here in the dictionary would be, that often gets put in would be institutionalized racism, right? So they'll just say racism, and there's racism, generally at an individual level. And then there's the institutionalized racism. And it just all, when saying racism, it all kind of comes in together into that. When they mean racist, they can mean that and this institutional stuff. It's not hard. It's been that way for decades, right?
these basic definitions can miss crucial aspects of the true meaning of racism. Ah, yes, the true meaning of Christmas, the true meaning of Hanukkah, the true meaning of racism. It really warms your heart inside, doesn't it? Power, dynamics, prejudice, and structural racism. They always have to throw the power dynamic thing in there, don't they? Well, black people, the white person says, well, black people can't be racist because they don't have any power. Yet somehow that's not seen as racist.
I mean, it's... the power dynamics and stuff, all that matters here, right? So there'll be some things that I'll say here, like, again, I agree, right? So a black person who doesn't really have the power can be racist, but when they're talking, this is a bit of equivocation, right? So you mean racism just like strictly on the individual level, and when they're talking about racism, they're talking about like institutional or structural racism and stuff like that. So when they say a black person can't be racist, is because they're the individual. So, well, like individual instances, yes, black people can be racist just like anybody else can, just like white people can. But it's the structural level where there's these structures, systems, institutions that disproportionately or exclusively attack black people or people of color. Yep, systemic racism. Right, but this is what they're talking about. So it's a bit of equivocation, and he tries to bring it back and forth.
Okay, white Karen, go off, son. But it's kind of racism. However you cut it, it's definitely racism. And you gotta love how they start the article with the Oxford Dictionary definition of what racism is, so they can go, you know what, fuck that. We're gonna come up with our own definition.
No. Like, again, dictionaries just describe usages, and they describe more general usages, right? And so that's like talking about with like a creationist about the definition of theory, right? So evolution is just a theory, and theory is just a guess. Therefore, evolution is just a guess, right? It's not true. It's not any of that thing, right? And that's the logic that works, and it follows through with that. With the definition of theory, that is a guess or a conjecture, and that stuff there. But then you have a scientific theory, right? A scientific theory is not the same as a guess or a conjecture, right? And so what they're committing is the equivocation fallacy, right? And this is what Sinatra says and others are, and they're trying to say that, no, racism is only this one thing because this is what the dictionary says, and the dictionary is, the final say on what words mean. Even though words don't have meanings, they have usages, right? And usages change over time, right? There's a reason why I won't say the F slur now, even if I'm referencing like a bundle of sticks or something like that, right? Because that's not the usage people that's used most commonly when that word is spoken nowadays.
Because racism is not as prevalent as we want it to be. Professor Peter Wade, a sociologist, opinion disregarded, from the...
Yeah, so much for facts and logic there, right? Fuck other branches of study and stuff like that, right? But you'll go run right to the evolutionary psychologist who will say all this stuff. Yeah, bundle of stickism. But I mean, it is what it is, right? Change here, like gay used to be, happy and merry, and not, homosexual, right? Or other forms of queer sexual identity and stuff like that.
The University of Manchester, double disregarded, tells us how racism is more complex and insidious.
So why is the University of Manchester something you would disregard? Like, what is this? Like, this is a rank anti-intellectualism, right? Of the highest order, but then they're going to come back and try to say that they're all facts and logic over your feels, which clearly isn't the case.
Than the traditional definition, explaining that it is a system of oppression that has historically existed and continues to do so against minorities, debilitating their lives in covert and overt ways. Oh boy. Peter tells Metro UK, opinion disregarded 3 times over, racism is an item. Let me try it in
Wait, what? You're going to disregard? Aren't you reading a Metro.co UK article? So you're going to disregard what the article says in general? What? Like, this is the biggest self-own. Yeah, the inability to refuse to recognize things, value of people. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you'll look at the definitions online that there's more to instead of just that first part, right? And it's with that with a lot of words because words are polysemous, right? So, if I told you I'm a pitcher, right? You're not going to think I'm something that serves drinks out of, right? You're going to probably think of some sports, whether it's baseball or cricket, something like that. No, cricket's bowling, not pitching. But baseball, for the most part, there. Right?
How I think his voice is going to sound. Racism is an ideology and a practice that produces a society in which people systematically have less access to resources, power, security, and well-being than others. Fucking soy boy.
Soy boy! Soy boy! Soy boy! Soy boy! What an absolute soy boy.
I would genuinely like to...
I mean, how is that being a soy boy? Right? Like, in any definition of that word there, right? The way that you guys use it, right? Yeah. Reviews, yep. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of that stuff in there. And like I said, I have, my issues with just saying racism and only meaning the structural, systemic or anything, and then saying, well, nobody can't be racist, right? So I have some issues with how that word's used to defend racist actions of individuals. But I mean, that's an issue with usage, right? In there and stuff. I understand that they're talking about structural or institutional when I make that distinction.
Know what access to security and well-being means. Like, do you not have access to hospitals and police? I thought you didn't want the police around. So which one is it? Do you want the police or do you not want the police? Do you want security or do you want, I don't know, not security? And then are you going to complain?
I mean, that's not what's being said at all, right? Like, security just doesn't mean a police force or anything like that, right? That'd be a very narrow definition of it. But, like, so, different thing, like, so part of it was the access of resources and all that other stuff that is unequal, is systematically in place to prevent people from accessing them. And so the security and the well-being stuff is, whether it's, I get sick, I'm able to go to the hospital and not go get thrown out of my home because I go bankrupt kind of thing. Right? Now, that's a general thing, but that's something that can be disproportionate to black communities, right? Than to white communities, right? And so it's a big thing, right? And that's just one random example, just to bring up here in the video and stuff. But security is just beyond just, the police force coming in, right?
About whatever you get, because you can't really have it both ways. And I know what you're thinking. Sinatra, they don't try to make sense. They just want something to complain about. And you're right. But at least put a little bit of effort.
I mean, the only one not making sense here is you, Sinatra, right? And it's just so you can complain about this, right? So you can complain about minorities, right? And we'll see later in the video where you're pretty overtly racist.
Into what you're complaining about. These systematic inequalities reflect hierarchical differences between people originally created by colonialism, which produced patterns of historical inequality, word fucking salad, that make it difficult for certain people to access opportunities and resources.
So there's nothing word salad about it, right? So if we go, slavery was a thing, right? So plenty of your work and labor wasn't there, and you didn't have that stuff to pass on to your children or generation. But beyond that, you had the Jim Crow laws, right? Preventing you to vote and barring you from voting, exercising your rights, all these things. And then beyond, like, the civil rights era and stuff, you had redlining, which is still a thing going into, I think, the 80s. And there might still be some of that around today. But those would be instances of racism that you might not necessarily consider racism if you're thinking just on an individual level. Yeah, the word salad stuff is... I hate people that say word salad without saying... Like, there are people that actually just say word salad that don't mean jack shit, right? So... Jordan Peterson is one such example. I think does a lot of word salad, a lot of big words, and ultimately says nothing, right? That you can concretely grab onto, which is very postmodernist of him, despite hating the postmodern neo-Marxists and stuff. So I find it funny that he does that stuff to himself. But yeah, it's there's nothing in this here. This is pretty straightforward, clear language that explains what they're talking about, and it's just Sinatra says plain dumb so that he can virtue signal to his right-wing audience. Yeah. Well, I mean, he does some good stuff within his particular field. It's all the shit he does outside of his field, which is nonsense, right? And I love it, so I never got around to making that video. Maybe I'll do that video at some point. Yeah, hasn't considered the lobster. Yeah, but I mean, I'll have to go around to the video, but where he talks about, well, so there are no true atheists. The only true atheist would be someone like Raskolnikov from Crime and Punishment. And I'm like, no, he wouldn't. Like, by your definition of what makes a theist and an atheist, Raskolnikov is not an atheist, right? Because he believes he's the Ubermensch, right? So he has some higher order that he orders his life by and makes his decision by. So in that definition, you have said is theism, right? So he's not an atheist, right? And so it's his wanting to denigrate nihilism. Yeah, it's just something to brush things off and go away, And there's a lot of these terms that go around, right? That's why I don't like woke schooled and SJW and all that other stuff. And it's like, oh, you're a woke schooled, argument dismissed, right? It's like, no, address the argument, address what's being said, right? It may be a dumb argument, but actually address it. Don't just go, oh, woke schooled, get fucked, right?
It's important to understand that racism is much more than outright thinking one race is better than the other. Most of us probably don't go around thinking our skin is better than the color of other people's skin. You could have definitely written that better. Literally 0 people walk around going, my skin is better and I'm a better person than you just because of the color of my skin.
Did he say 0 people? Because, I mean, white supremacists, black nationalists and stuff do think that way.
Of other people's skin? You could have definitely written that better. Literally 0 people walk around going, my skin is better and I'm a better person than you just because of the color of my skin.
I mean, so this is hyperbole, right? So this would be, in this instance, he's probably using the literally hyperbolic, but if we went with the kind of things he would whinge about, with literally also meaning figuratively, we can say that he's saying, no, you're saying 0 people say this when it's obviously not, right? And it'd be a bit disingenuous of myself to take his argument and say that he's saying literally 0 people instead of just like, very few people do it, like, stuff there. But it's, it's not. There's enough people in there that do that.
Nobody does that. It's more along the lines of they don't agree with me, they don't share my ideas, they don't share my culture. We don't have anywhere near the same morals, so I don't want them around. Now, is that racist? Arguable.
I mean, no, that if you apply that to their skin color, that's very racist, right? So that's being overtly racist. That, people of certain skin colors have a certain culture and therefore can't live with us is very racist. It's not arguable, it's very racist.
Arguable. But that's mostly what you would consider racist people believe. Nobody is just outright going, I got white skin, so I'm the best. Seriously. Oh, probably not. All right, we got a list.
So, yeah, it was hyperbole earlier, and he's trying to push it there, but he's minimizing the fact that white nationalists, Ku Klux Klan, all that people exist that think just by virtue of your skin color, you're a higher level person than that. And there are some extremists and other POC groups that do believe that. Like, so there's the ones that kind of worship melanin to a strange degree in like the black community, that think like melanin is a fucking superpower. That is very much in that racist mold there, right? You have If you go over to Asia in general, just like the differences between Asians and the hatred for some of their, like the Japanese are historically fucking racist as hell towards other Asians. Right? So based on skin color and other things beyond just the skin color, other physical features. But I mean, that's kind of been a historical thing cross lines. So here's the big thing he's going to get into and whinge about is the list in here. And we'll talk about how he wants to change things and how he wants to phrase things and basically take what's being said and turn it over here. But so things that don't fit into, so remember, this is just a list of things that don't fit into traditional definition of racism but may still contribute to it.
Make sure you stretch up for the mental gymnastics we're about to see. Get those arms out, touch your toes, throw them in a circle. All right, I'm ready. Changing the definition of racism could bridge the current disconnect between those oppressed and those doing the oppressing. Holy fuck, man. So, what definition of racism do you hold? And is it time to change? I hope you guys are ready for this. Mixing up people who seem to be the same ethnicity. But who does that? What? Oh, okay. All right.
I mean, it's a joke that's made pretty commonly about how all Asians look the same and all this other stuff, right? Like, this is pretty common, right? And then there's some POCs that'll turn it around, on white people and say white people look all the same and stuff, right? So, that's a thing. I mean, you have to be a literal fucking moron to not know or understand or even be aware of it.
Not bothering to learn an ethnic name, always mispronouncing it, calling them something that's not easier to pronounce, making a show of saying it. So if you have a hard name and people don't just make a nickname for you or something, that is racism if they make a nickname for you. Okay, so all right, fine. I guess everybody at Starbucks is racist, but let's keep going.
So, all right, he left a lot out of there, right? So, if someone's got a hard ethnic name, right? So, let's look at we'll pick someone who's white, right? We'll take PewDiePie, right? Felix is easy, but people always screw up his last name. It's Chelberg, right? But they see the KJ and they spell it, they say it wrong. So, take a name like that, and what's what they're saying is racist is not bothering to learn to say it correctly, and even if you do know what to say it's correctly, you purposely pronounce it funny or the incorrect way, and usually that's done out of malice and stuff there. So it's kind of the same thing with the misgendering trans people and stuff like that. And you can see why that in that situation is transphobic, and with talking about race, it'd be racist, right? So if you take something like that. Now, calling up something that's easier to pronounce. So, right, it's one thing if, there's people with long and weird names across the spectrum, and then they'll say, all right, call me this, because I know people have a hard time understanding or, not understanding, but pronouncing my name or getting it right. So you can call me this nickname, right? The calling someone a nickname, so I don't want to say anything and come off blatantly racist here when coming up with these names, but I don't know, say Red. For whatever reason, my name Red is difficult to pronounce, right? And so I said, and you say, I'm just going to call you R, right? With no regard to me as a person, because you can't pronounce Red properly, and you don't care to pronounce it properly. That would be racist. But if I'm like, all right, just call me R, dude. You can call me R, right? People call it there. I know my name. I know Red is hard, right? And do it that way, right? And so that's fine to do it there. And then making a show of saying it, right? So this is, the thing I remember was this is going to go a bit into transphobia and stuff. With Jangles was debating Brian from Mythicist Milwaukee. And he was talking about this stuff, and Brian was being his disingenuous self and trying to pivot and get away from things. And so basically my thing in the chat when I lost my mind just listening to this Weasley fuck that I do not like, and so he ultimately blocked me. Although I did get he still writes tweets for Myth Informed or Mythicist Milwaukee's official Twitter account, so I still have the tweet where he called grifter a slur. You know, unironically, to use it that way. It just kind of shows how disingenuous he is. But anyways, I said, well, so he was talking about misgendering. I said, well, so it's like Brian. Your name's Brian, and I go around, I call you Lucy, or you know, Sarah, or anything like that. Call you by a woman's name that's not your name. I consistently do that to you, right? That would be the same as the misgendering thing that gets you in trouble at work, right? And these laws and descriptions, like, oh, they pretend it's like, oh, how am I supposed to remember different pronouns, right? It's like, it's not that hard. And if you slip up, you make a mistake, trans people are understanding of it, right? And so it'd be the same here with the racism, right? So if you meet somebody and it's a new name and it's tough to pronounce and you flub it a few times when you first meet the person and different things until you get it down, right? Nobody's going to say that's racism. It's when you go out and say, you know, like I would say to Brian, instead of say, hey, Brian, I'd say, hey, Lucy, hey, Sarah, you know, whatever that thing to him there, right? And so that's me making a show of not respecting their name, their pronouns, or anything like that, and that's where it comes with the racism or the transphobia and stuff like that.
Fine. Touching a black person's hair. I see this all the fucking time. That literally never fucking happens. I have never seen someone just walk up and pat a black person on the head and go, oh, I just wanted to see how curly your hair felt. The fuck? No, that doesn't happen.
I mean, I'm a white guy with long hair. That fucking happens. I mean, that happens to me. People, you know, this is going to be a bit, you know, it happens to me, so I figure it happens to other people as well, right? I mean, it's something that happens to me there because I wear my hair long, which is not traditional and stuff, and when I, you know, condition it and do all that other stuff, it's got a nice bounce, a nice nice look to it and all that stuff there, and fuck yeah, people touch it, right? Because I think like I have a shit ton of product in it or doing something fancy to it. It's just like, no, that's just how my hair kind of lays normally. So it happens, and I imagine it happens quite a bit. All the fucking Karens, I tell you.
And by the way, if you notice, these only apply to black people so far.
I mean, no, none of those only apply to black people, like at all, right? They apply to everybody, right? So like, think if for whatever reason I got an older English kind of name and spelled it that way, right? So if like I've been watching a lot of The Last Kingdom, you know, and through that excited for season 4 coming out. But if I had something like, you know, like Ethelbard or Ethelwald or something like that, and the way it's spelt, and you know, I put that out there, someone would butcher my name, right? Like, I think I have a pretty reasonable last name, and obviously I can't say my real last name, but people still butchered that all the time, right? Because they couldn't figure out how to pronounce it right. So just imagine having that kind of name, or if you have a name from a non-English name from somewhere else in Europe because you're from Europe, right? Think of all the, you know, Polish names and Hungarian names and stuff like that, right? Those are just as hard to pronounce and all that other stuff there, right? And, you know, different, maybe the ethnicity's a bit not quite, because in America we don't look at white people as anything other than white people generally. I mean, there are some different instances with like the Irish and the Italians and stuff like that, but generally nowadays, you know, you're of European descent, you're white, so they're not going to mix up that ethnicity. And a lot of us don't necessarily care a whole lot. Not saying that it's everybody, but, you know. So those aren't just only black people.
Easily searchable things to the only minority person in your vicinity. What? So, okay, whatever. Making assumptions.
So, I assume this is, what do I want to say? This would be something like, what would be the best, the example? But, I'm drawing a blank on what would be the best example to explain this, bit to him, but we'll just go on. There's more on the list here, and it's going to go a while.
Based on race. That would fall under the average racism category. But, all right. Okay, let's go. Seeing racism in things that are not racist. Oh, so something every fucking lunatic on the left does. Sees anything and go, you know what, that's racism. So does that mean Anita Sarkeesian's everything is racist, everything is sexist little spiel means she's a racist? Fucking insanity.
Again, so part of that is hyperbole. Now, obviously, those comments originally aren't all hyperbole, but she's talking about systemic racism and stuff like that, and where she sees racism. She's not talking about individual stuff. So even though she says everything is racist, that everything is racist systematically or structurally or things like that, is different than saying, she was talking about the structures and stuff instead of individual things like that. But a lot of the seeing racism and things that are not racist are
singing the N-word in songs. You know what? Go fuck yourself. If they didn't want it sang that way, they wouldn't have put it in the song. Whatever. Calling a black person uppity.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't do this in public. Listening to a rap song that uses the N-word or stuff like that. But if I'm by myself and I'm singing along, I'm not going to censor myself, right, when singing a song. I'm not just going to make a show of it out in public, though, saying it. Yeah, do all black people have curly hairs like you? Yeah. It's a lot of that stuff there with, like, if you have any kind of weird hairstyle, like, just beyond long, like in high school, I used to do real wild hairstyles. Not real wild, like over the top or anything, but I experimented with my hairstyle beyond just traditional stuff. And I still had people that wanted to put their fucking hands in my hair, right? So I totally believe that. But yeah, singing it in public, yeah, don't. Not that I think that's necessarily racist, but come on, show some respect. Don't be an asshole.
Yeah, it's pretty bad, but I don't know if it's racist. Unless you're saying that uppity N-word. Being colorblind.
Well, uppity is almost used exclusively with black people, right? And so when you say it to a black person, you're being racist, right? It's like saying the N-word. All right.
Not seeing color is racist, but saying things are racist that aren't is also racist. What the... My blood pressure's rising.
Yeah, because of all those facts and logic you're using. So the colorblind thing is often used as a shield for not being racist when you do racist things, right? Part of it is you're not acknowledging, so part of it is, you see the how do I want to explain this? Part of it is like, hey, there's differences with black people and white people in terms of structural things, right? And you say, well, I'm colorblind, I don't see those differences, right? I'm ignoring them, right? So it's the ignoring things that are there that are racist and things that so if they're because I'm colorblind, I'm not racist, I'm ignoring, right? So that's a big part of why they say that's racist, right? It's not, and he kind of misses that point.
Speaking over a person of color talking about racism. Yeah, white people, sit the fuck down. Unless you're sticking up for black people, then stand the fuck up. Bringing up an unrelated race topic.
So they're talking about things like, hey, there's this structural racism, this stuff here, and, a white person like Sinatra says, saying, you have all legal rights, there's no racism, anything that stuff, while they're trying to explain things that are racist and racist experiences with racism that they have, right? Oh yeah, I imagine that happens too with plenty of the Sikh women.
Topic while talking to a person of color, e.g., I would have voted for Obama for a third term. That's just some white liberal guilt right there. That's not racism. That's just pandering. Telling people you watch.
I mean, but this is just one example, right? So this is the one example that would obviously applied to people here. It's the I have a black friend thing, but there's other things, right? So so it could be just as things like you're bringing up, oh, I saw Black Panther, therefore I'm not racist, or Crazy Rich Asians and stuff that they bring on this second point. So not second point, but this next point in the bullet list can be rolled right back into this, right? In talking about it, as you pivoting away, right? So it's like they're talking about some kind of structural racism, or whether or not you like the term microaggressions, if it's something as minor as that, right? Or if it's something more in between those two things, and they're talking to you about this racism. It's like, oh, I'm not racist, I would have voted Obama for a second term, or I'm not racist, I love Black Panther, or I'm not racist, I have a black friend, right? So that's what they're talking about.
Watched a minority-led film multiple times, such as Black Panther, Crazy Rich Asians, Get Out. Again, pandering. So I would agree that's racism. You walk by a group of black people and go, hey guys, hey fellas, I just recently saw Black Panther 4 times. Aren't I your ally? Ugh. And someone did it too.
Well, it's not even beyond just ally stuff. Like I said, there's plenty of things that a conservative could say to deflect racism in this conversation that he ignores, but he seems to get. Why? He seems to get it because he can shit on people on the left, right?
Using an example of a famous person of color to deny how racist something is. I literally don't even know what that's supposed to mean.
Obama's black, Obama's the president, therefore racism isn't a thing, right? That's the anti-SJW argument in a nutshell, a lot of times in dismissing claims of racism, right? That's the easiest one right then and there. And I'm almost 100% positive that Sinatra says has used that argument in the past.
Blackface cultural appropriation, where you borrow cultural items as a costume. Blackface, maybe, but I guess Trudeau was okay, and Ralph Northam, they're okay doing it. But if anybody you don't like does it, that's super racist. That is super racist.
I mean, no, they called that shit out as racist in when that stuff came out. I mean, and this is the pivoting that they're talking about earlier when talking about race issues, right? And not wanting to talk about what's racist or not. Now, I'm a bit different on like the cultural appropriation or borrowing cultural items as a costume. I'm fine with it. In general, I know people of those cultures aren't, but I think a lot of it, like when they talk about cultural appropriation, or what I get, or from what I understand when they talk about it, is that it's lauded when white people do it, but when the minority people wear their cultural stuff, it's looked down on, right? So and probably that difference probably says, hey, don't wear this stuff as a costume anyways, right? Because of that difference in how people are treated. Don't do it. Now, would that change if everything was level and you wear whatever you want and you're fine? Maybe. I don't know. I can't speak to that, but from how I understand the things and how I've had things explained to me that way, that's what I would that's where I would stand on it, as the middle ground.
Denying being defensive when confronted with an idea of racism. So if you deny being racist, most likely because you weren't racist, that is also racism? Okay. Don't notice race.
Well, so what would happen often in that situation would be, I have a black friend, or I haven't, you'd be the pivot. I'd vote for Obama for a third term or something like that when say, hey, this is racist. Now, I may ultimately disagree, and we may come down to something where it's maybe not actually racist, but this is what these other things here would wind in here. So I think, we're going through this list. It's a little too long and kind of specific bit by bit, where some of these things could be blended in here, but I don't know, maybe they couldn't work it as a list without kind of parsing it the way they did.
Don't deny being racist, and don't say something is racist when it isn't. And don't use the N-word when singing a rap song. Bringing up someone's race when it's not relevant. Okay, yeah, I can agree with that one. Referring to the race card, even though we all know that's a real thing. Not believing that people of color contribute to society. I don't think anybody really says that.
I mean, people do say that. There's why the ethno-nationalists are a thing, the white nationalists and stuff like that. Now, the race card is where they might be going with that is that, yes, there are people that try to play their race and play things where it's not that situation where that's kind of where the idea of the race card is, but oftentimes, like with terms like SJW or woke school or anything like that, people like Sinatra says will throw it at everything. You know, oh, you're just playing the race card. Oh, you're just playing the race card. Just playing the race. Just playing the race card. So what it was originally meant, like, so this would be like virtue signaling, right? How they'd say, oh, they're virtue signaling. Virtue signaling meant something in academics as a term, and it was brought out, and it was used just in to call everything virtue signaling that was quote unquote SJW, right? And so that's where was going on that tangent? But I mean that's kind of like the what they're bringing up with what the race card is. It would be the same thing as like virtue signaling or SJW, woke school, and stuff like that. And that it's often used to dismiss claims, right?
Covering up racism as an opinion or freedom of speech. Well, it most certainly can be both of those. Guess what? Racism is freedom of speech. Speech you don't like is still protected speech, no matter what. It can be racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever the fuck. It's still free speech. Shut the fuck up about free speech.
You do it first, Sinatra, right? So what's bringing up here is where it's like, oh, it's just my opinion, or that's just opinion or freedom of speech, right? So this is used to, like, if you go back to the RR situation, this was used to dismiss RR's transphobia. For those that don't know, RR Rationality Rules put out a trans women should be barred from women's sports video about a year ago now. And so a lot of people kind of washed away the transphobia as it being his opinion, right? And that's what they're talking about, is that they're using the opinion or freedom of speech as shields from calling racism what it is, or calling, in Rationality Rules case, transphobia what it was.
Asking for evidence when a person of color explains their lived experience. No, I think that's okay, especially when you have people like faking hijab pulls and doing all this crazy shit and just getting away with it, going, you know what? I'm going to need some evidence of that. It's not a bad thing. Actually, it's a good thing. Because if we just believed people whenever they said something, Jesse Smollett would have gotten a bunch of innocent people arrested. So yes, that is purposely okay. You know what? I advocate asking for evidence. Telling someone they're racist for bringing...
So this is something different than with legal matters, right? So if you report something to the law, like the hijab pulls and stuff like that, then you should look into it, right? So, but this is like, if you're talking to your friend or whatever, or even if they're not your friend or an acquaintance or whatever, and they say, "Hey, this happened to me growing up. This is why, this act of racism are the things we see." So like, the one I'll bring up is Oreo on YouTube. Talks about how he gets the talk, as a black kid, got his talk from his parents about what to do if the cops are ever to stop you or pull you over, right? And so he talks about this here because of the just kind of the situation we have with cops and minorities as is, and so they get that different talk that generally speaking we don't get as white people. Now we get some of hey, cop stops, pulls you over, do this there, but it's never the idea that, oh no, the cop's going to shoot and kill you, or at least it wasn't in my case or in most people's cases. Maybe if you live in a poorer neighborhood and are white, you get some of that as well, but yeah. And so like with the cultural appropriation stuff, Ohana, even with that stuff, so like, I don't know, if I don't see any issue in dressing up in like important religious garb of like Christianity or anything like that for a costume, right? nor should I think anything's wrong. Now, I understand a lot of people say that way, but like, I dress up as the Pope or whatever, going on. There's millions of people that take that shit very seriously, and then wearing that Pope costume, right, would be like the Native American headdress and stuff. Now, there's the issue, like I mentioned earlier, with the differences in how people are treated, or maybe like, hey, don't do the Native American stuff, right? Just because of this imbalance. Whereas, if you're doing something like the Pope, I mean, Pope's been ahead of an institution that's been pretty oppressive to people around the world. Yep, and so, yeah, like, I get that, Alhana, and I get why that's not doing that, but, I'm kind of the one, but, again, I think in what some people might think is a bit colorblind attitude and stuff, and, and in my upbringing where it was, so I haven't experienced all that stuff, so maybe I feel a little more okay with some of the stuff than I probably should, but, yeah, I'm the one like, hey, I like this, I'm going to grab this, there from different fashions or things and put together, right? But, I mean, that's me, and that's probably got my things and my some of my issues. All right, let's finish this up. He's almost done.
Up race. Is this a fucking parody article? Is this parody? It's got to be. And finally, the last.
So, telling people it's racist for bringing up race. No, you said that pretty earlier in this video. You made claims that would fit this bullet point to a T in this video, right? And so that's kind of the race card thing, right? So, while there might be legitimate examples where what is supposed to be conceived of as the race card is being used that way, what's often the case is that the race card is used up anytime anybody brings up any issue of race. And so that would be this bullet point. And that would be the issue that they have with referring to the race card, right, as being racist, right? So if they bring up something that's, racial inequality and all that other stuff, and racist, systemic racism and stuff like that, and you say, oh, you're playing the race card, right? That's you. And a lot of people, like Sinatra says, I don't know if him specifically, but a lot on that side will say it's racist, right? And so just playing the race card is being racist. Right, and so that's what that bullet point deals with.
Last one, thinking you're privy to racial struggles because you had diverse members in your family or social groups. Didn't you just fucking say? Didn't you just fucking say that not believing somebody is racism, yet believing your family and knowing what they went through is also racism? Is this a fucking parody? I'm looking right now. Control F. Parody. Nope. No parody. No parody. So the big takeaway from this is that
So what that's referring to is the privy part isn't that, oh, you don't believe your minority family or anything like that and the racism they deal with, right? It's has to do with thinking that because you are aware of these specific things that you completely understand the struggle. So one thing that this might roll into is kind of like Bernie supporters and how they feel about the way African Americans voted in the primaries, right? Where they think, they have some of this knowledge of the racial inequality and the systemic racism and stuff like that, and so say, well, these policies are there to address it, and these are the things there, and you're voting against your best interest by not voting for for Bernie, who has these policies, right? And so they're saying, hey, you're not privy to what we're dealing with here, and you're missing part of the picture, and why they would vote for Biden over Sanders, right? And so they're saying, hey, you thinking that you're privy to it here, and that black people aren't aware of what's going on around them, and therefore you have all the answers and stuff there, and we're going to go vote for Biden instead of Sanders, right? That's that would be a situation that would fit that last bullet point. So it's not just believing people that it happens and stuff here, right?
if you see things and you say things are racist when they're not racist, is just as racist as saying that somebody's racist for bringing up race. No matter what, you're racist. Just change the whole fucking definition of racism to...
Yeah, it's very much that, the black friend, black uncle argument, but it would extend beyond that. But here, they're not saying everything is just the same kind of racism. And this is a weird kind of take that certain form, like, there's a scale. Like, there's certain forms of racism that are like, hey, if I go out and lynch a black person, right, that's pretty high up there on the racism scale. Where if I, say, oh, hey, you're playing the race card, that's not going to be up besides. Nobody's going to compare those as just the same level of racism, right? And nothing in that list is hinted at that, right? So that's him getting needlessly emotional and mad, which, where's the facts and logic, Sinatra, to this situation, right?
to fit what you need. I guess no. It's not fucking parody. This is a real article. This has got to be one of the most insane things I have ever fucking read on this channel. I really don't know how to express how I'm... Look, I'm so flustered I can't even talk or think straight. I don't know how to express how frustrated I am with this doublethink and mental gymnastics. I think I threw out my fucking back just reading.
I mean, where's the doublethink and the mental gymnastics, right? All the gymnastics are done by you, right? In trying to construct how this is wrong, right? I mean, there's arguments that you can make against things in that article and make positions, but when you try to stretch and twist this into this weird combobulation of different things, I don't even know how to use that combobulation, right? But this weird monster of an argument that's not there, this weird straw man, and then get upset about it, right? You're not approaching the argument with any, a semblance of trying to understand and engage the argument.
Oh, look, we're getting a history lesson on the word racism. Like, that's fucking relevant at all. Oh my God. As a result of the enduring definition, racism is off.
I mean, the history of a definition would be important, right? Like, with the atheism example I brought up, right? So they'll take the two roots, and they'll take one aspect of what A can mean in there, and they'll get it to where atheism is the lack of belief in God, right? When that's historically not how it's been used, right? And they'll make the claim that, oh, it's not that case, right? And so that's just, well, it's defined by people who were trying to put people like us down who lack belief and lack religiosity and stuff like that. And it's like, sure, for a bit, but that's the case of where it comes from. But I mean, still, we're talking about how the word's used, and it's still used to this day that way in philosophy, right? As a technical term.
Often thought of as something that happened in our past or something that can only be committed by evil people who think they're superior. No. Why are so many people's experience of racism dismissed?
I mean, yes, that's used quite a bit in these I watched a shit ton of anti-SJW content for years. Right. I'm kind of aware of how they've approached things like Black Lives Matter and how they've approached these things. And that first, it's not really a paragraph, but that sentence is pretty much on par with a good chunk of anti-SJW content against things like Black Lives Matter and other content talking about racism, right?
As not actually racist, because the past definition doesn't encapsulate racism today. So you mean new racism. Racism you made up, so there is racism. There is a supply and demand to the universe that will always be a thing. So if you don't have the supply of racism that you need, you just change what it is to meet the demand that you have. So you're looking for demons that aren't really there. You're just kind of making it up as you go. In her groundbreaking work, I'm sure...
I mean, that's not what is being said at all, and that's not even what they're talking about, right? So, right? So this is talking about things that, in the layperson, in the general talk would be, hey, racism is an individual thing, but then we have institutionalized racism or systemic racism, which is a separate thing, right? They can be these things, right? And so what's being said is that it's all racism and not just two separate and distinct things like that, right?
Sure it is. White fragility, Robin something, refers to this as a good-bad binary.
I mean, Robin DiAngelo, I think that's, if I got that wrong, apologize, but that's probably what it is. But I mean, that's the kind, I don't know if he's doing this intentionally because he saw the list and he's like, oh, I don't know how to pronounce that, so I'm going to call her something, right? And make a show calling her something, right? Instead of Robin DiAngelo, right? And I might have that wrong, the pronunciation wrong, and I apologize if I do. But, so I don't know if he's doing it intentionally because he saw the list and it's like, I'm going to be racist. I'm going to be glib and do this thing that they say is racist. Or if it's just like, yeah, I don't know the name and I'm just going to skip over and call him something.
I thought things weren't binary. If we define race...
Wait, what? Oh, this is dumb.
Racism is something that...
The good, bad, binary things. Oh, I thought things weren't binary. It's stupid. Some things are binary, some things aren't binary, right? So to go and argue that we talk about a binary or non-binary or something with gender and bring it over here to racism. And this is something that comes up too. This is like the I'll bring up and I'll double back to the rationality rules situation because this has happened in several streams and discussions where I've lost some friends over it during that debacle, and they literally wanted, you're either, you know, this bad awful person if you're a transphobe and you're all the, you know, like the worst of the worst thing. And I'm like, dude, there's a gradient into where things are, right? So that's something different. It's like, no, you're either this bad awful person that you're going to engage in F slur drags and all these other things, you know, or T slur drags and stuff like that to kind of transphobe, or you're not a transphobe, right? And so it's the kind of thinking there. So this is what she's talking about, and it's not just a strict binary. It's a spectrum of things that where it is, right? Yeah, open racism became less acceptable, and racist, yeah, created waves to hide their racism. Yeah, you're right about that.
That only bad people commit, then of course, most of us are not racist. Robin explains the most effective adaptation of racism over time is that the idea of racism is a conscious bias held by mean people. If we are not aware of having negative thoughts about people of color, don't tell racist jokes, are nice people, and even have friends of color, fuck me running, then we cannot be racist. She authored a book called White Fragility. Isn't that racist, where you're bringing up race where there is no racism, and you're denying a white person's lived experience of dealing with racism and the systematic oppression of race? See how it works? It's all fucking hyperbolic bullshit.
I mean, you're all hyperbolic bullshit with that nonsense, right? You know, and this is the conversation he's not ready to have about it, and this conversation he's going to bring up here. Like, he thinks white people are just white. This is kind of the dumb shit stuff that comes out of, like, the white nationalists, right? Where they think this pan-European things. Like, you go over to Europe, and Alhana could probably attest to this, but, you know, if you're British or, you know, even beyond that, like, you don't just think just British is there. Like, so you have the English, the Scots, the Welsh, the Irish and stuff. They don't like each other, and they don't like the French, right? So a French person is this stuff, generally speaking, right? And this kind of thing. So they don't see everybody as just, hey, we're all white. We're all one big white European family. So those distinctions are there. We don't have those in America, so a lot of people nowadays, and then especially like the white nationalist types, see anybody of light skin color as white. But that wasn't always the case in the U.S., right? So the way we treated the Irish, kind of some of the slurs and stuff that come out about against the Italians and stuff. So yeah, that's not been the case, and white's not necessarily as well defined as race. And you can even argue, to some extent, there's some leeway in what it means to be black, right? And this is a conversation I can't do on stream. It's way too complicated to bringing this up a video. Maybe I'll put it into a video. Who knows? That may be way too controversial to put on there if I get it wrong. But I'll have to pass it around because there's some things I'll bring up. Like, I follow baseball a lot. You know, I have stuff here, and I imagine here as I start streaming more, especially if I get laid off, because of the coronavirus stuff. We're going to play some out of the park baseball on some streams instead of just doing all this. But anyways, so I'm really into baseball, and there's plenty of things over history and stories and stuff that you'll bring up that show that, like, yeah, the Polish, right? Yeah. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of it. Like, you go over there, they do not like what would be quote-unquote white people on ethnic things, and fuck me, outside of language, some of them I can't really tell apart, right? So it's like, how do you hate these people? It gets really weird. But the same thing happens with, like, black people and stuff here, and what's constitutes someone who is black. And so the thing I use is some stories from baseball. So there was, during the era before the color barrier was broken, there was Minnie Minoso was a Cuban of African descent who played in the Negro Leagues, and I think it was it Harry Simpson? I think was the guy who told it, but Minoso recounted in his biography that he was told by Harry Simpson that he's not black, even though he's of African descent, right? And so this is how, and there's other stories that go along, like, so in more recent times, Torrey Hunter said Vladimir Guerrero was a fake black, right? And how that fits together, because he's Dominican, right? And so a lot of black people think black is just African American, you're in America, and, you know, it's this really strict thing, and who counts as African American and black. And the other story, I think it was after the Giants won one of their World Series in the 2010s, Chris Rock was on Brian Gumbel, and he was talking about how there's no black, or why baseball isn't popular with black people anymore, even though Pablo Sandoval is, was he Venezuelan of African descent? So, you know, technically a quote-unquote black person. Chris Rock doesn't mention, like, there's no black players on the Giants team, right? So even that kind of stuff, and how we understand black, and how you take it stuff that way, right? Like, you know, then there's, I'm getting into this and it's getting even longer and kind of rambly, so who knows? It'll probably get struck down by YouTube. Then there's the situation of a mixed race individual and stuff. You get to, like, so, and I was having this discussion on Twitter with Duke the Man about 4 or 5 months ago now, and it never got really far because he kind of didn't want to see what it was, but I brought up, like, Elizabeth Warren's claim to being a Native American. Now, based on the genetics test, she has very minuscule Native American ancestry, but the Native Americans don't accept her as Native American. And so I was talking about with, like, mixed race people, at what point do they stop being black, right? And so we had historically the one drop rule in America and discovering that, and it was used quite frequently against white people as well to, you know, could be saying, hey, you're a black person, right? Because you have one drop there, even if they didn't know or not. And so that's how the racism interacted. But you get to, you know, you get to people that are really light-skinned or white-passing mixed race individuals. Are they black? Right? By any definition, and ask about it, right? And so, like I said, this is a big convoluted thing, and I probably should get my thoughts down. But anyways, it's just like what we can argue that, well, there's no really white race, that you can make the case there's probably not really a black race. Now, one of the ways they do it is how they treat people of color, right? So if, like, the white people around you treat you as black, you're black, right? So this was, who is the first baseman from Puerto Rico that's of African descent in the 60s? Juan Marichal was a pitcher. I'm drawing a blank on his name. It's not super important, but he said in his thing that, you know, when coming over, you know, so he was an American citizen. So even by some of the strictest definitions of who's African American and thus black, he would be black, but because he was from Puerto Rico, he spoke Spanish and stuff. So he's talking about those players of African descent from the Caribbean and stuff, and how they had to deal with in situations where they, weren't black because they're from Puerto Rico, right? But they were also treated as black in other situations, like in segregation, dealing with that. I don't know where I was going with all that, other than generally there. So if I do a video on that, that's going to have to be something more scripted. But that was kind of the general idea and the discussion topic that we're having on it. Why is my bit rate low? No, it's still good. Anyways, let's back to this video and we'll knock her out.
Literally nothing else that was said in that couple of paragraphs that I screen capped. I cannot even remember it. I mean, I went back and looked, but it's fucking irrelevant because that is just such a glaring hypocrisy that it's really hard to take anything said seriously in here. At least when I do these types of videos, I can try to put myself in their position, see where they're coming from a little bit, but this is just all fucking bullshit. It's a bunch of malarkey, as Biden would say. Thus, a person is...
I mean, you didn't even try to put yourself in that position. You were looking antagonistically from the get-go to have something to bitch about.
It's either racist or not racist. If a person is racist, that person is bad. If a person is not racist, that person is good. Although racism does, of course, occur in individual acts that... Whatever the fuck she said.
Yeah, see, this is you not trying to understand at all, right? So I'll use the example. He was hanging out in chat before. I don't know if he's back yet, but Rhetoric and Discourse talks about this on one of his streams where he's talking about his little bit of homophobia left over. So he had gay friends and stuff like that, treated them well, supported gay marriage and all that other stuff. But he wouldn't hug his gay friends, right, to say goodbye. And it's not because he didn't want to touch people or anything like that. It's that, because he would hug his the straight friends that were women. He would hug his straight friends that were guys. And but he wouldn't do it for the gay people. So that was a little bit of homophobia that he had, right? And stuff there. Like, Rhett's a pretty good guy, right? I like him, good friend. Stuff like that. But that was still something that he was doing that was homophobic, right? Or at least... what's the phrase I want to use? Kind of betrayed some of the homophobic sentiments, right? Even in all the good picture, he's a good person, right?
So either a person is racist or they're not. But if we're going by the list that was mentioned before this, everything short of just handing your wallet over to the closest friend of color is the only thing you can do to be not racist. So having black kids, enjoying black culture, being hip in black lingo, doing all of this stuff, having black friends, wanting to vote for Obama for a third term, all that is racist. So and here's what I said, where he goes on the whole list of being racist, right? While trying to argue against any of that there, right? So the give your wallet to your closest black friend is the only thing you can do that's not racist. It's like, that's not what the article said at all. You're being ridiculously racist right now. New criteria of not being a racist, just handing over your wallet to the nearest black person so they don't have to mug you for it. How do we...
And goes right away with the overt racism right there with the mugging, right? I don't know what else to say on that.
We take on this meaning of racism. If we understand that racism isn't about intentions and is rather held up by a system and individual acts, no matter how well-meaning the individual, we can begin the work to be anti-racist. Being anti-racist means actively doing the work to challenge racism, not acting defensively when confronted with it, and passing on the meaning. Remy Sena, I don't know, a lecturer in sociology, again, opinion disregarded, at Middlesex University, tells us it is a conscious effort. And can you guess what part we're skipping over? It's 2 or 3 paragraphs of her, and then the rest of the article is just all 3 of them shilling their products for you to buy. So it's really...
So, that last little bit is talking about, it's like, hey, we want to stand up to racism, we want to do these things, but when people point out things that are racist, we excuse it or push it away and stuff like that betrays some racist sentiments, right, in doing it. That's all that's being said at that point, right?
really not about being anti-racist. It's not about stopping racism. They're just using They're just using racism as a way to peddle their bullshit. That's it. You want to be anti-racist? Buy this book. And you know for a fact it's going to be overwhelmingly bought by white liberal women who the worst thing in the world to them is being accused of being racist. So this article really puts them in a corner, doesn't it? If you see racism in things that don't involve race, you're a racist. If you don't see racism, if you're colorblind, you're a racist. If you assume things...
I mean, yeah, if you don't see racism, you know, you intentionally try not to see racism and ignoring it, that would be racist. Now, he misspoke here. He obviously meant if you don't see race, if you don't see color and stuff like that. But I mean, I don't know if you want to call this a Freudian slip or what, but it does betray some of his underlying prejudices and biases, if you want to go so far as to say bigotry as well. But here we are at the end of the video.